You're listening to Let's Talk Sustainable Business.
Hello, my name is Uwe Schulte, and it's a pleasure to welcome you to this episode of our series, Let's Talk Sustainable Business, brought to you by the Conference Board Global Sustainability Center. Today, I will be continuing the conversation with Lars Kissau, Senior Vice President, Strategic Business Development at BASF. First, let me introduce our guest, Lars Kissau, to you. Lars joined BASF 18 years ago as marketing manager. He spent 7 years in Southeast Asia and China in different roles for BASF. Returning to Europe, he served 3 years as Senior Vice President, Corporate Sustainability and Strategy. Now he is the SVP Global Strategy Business Development at BASF's Petrochemical division. Lars holds a PhD in organic chemistry. In this episode, we will dive a little bit into the business aspects of chemical recycling as implemented by BASF. If you are not yet familiar with the technological concept of chemical recycling, I recommend you listen first to our prior episode, where we explore with Lars a bit more the chemical and technical background. But now, welcome back, Lars.
Thanks, Uwe. It's a pleasure to be back and to continue the discussion. If I look back at the last episode, we talked about how chemical recycling can contribute to addressing the global plastic waste challenge. I think we talked about the 250 million tons of plastic waste that are created every year, with only about 20% being currently recycled. And addressing these remaining 80% of plastic waste is where really all the players along the value chain need to come together, and where we as BASF believe that with chemical recycling we can create one piece of that puzzle. The chemical recycling BASF, we run another project called ChemCycling, where we work with partners to transform plastic waste that hasn't been recycled into pyrolysis oil. And then we use this pyrolysis oil as a feedstock in our existing assets to make new chemical products that are chemically not distinguishable from products made from virgin raw materials. So that really allows us for the first time to make products that can be in very demanding applications where you have either regulatory or performance requirements that really require virgin identical materials.
As I said before, if our audience wants to understand a little bit more about the process, then please listen to the prior episode. But let me just summarize what I heard you say. So in essence, you take really dirty and mixed plastic waste. You throw it through a process that consumes energy, but in essence, it then breaks down the whole waste into the original molecules. And basically, you create an oil that is identical to oil that would come out of a fossil fuel well. Not
Similar,
completely identical, it's similar. I get that. But basically, that's what it is. So you start from scratch, if you will, again. Now, that raises then my question, you guys are very strong in that fossil fuel process. And this is a difficult and still to be scaled up process. Why do you guys engage in something like that at all?
Well, if I just can go back to some of the points I mentioned last time. First of all, the company itself for the whole history has been really driven by resource efficiency ever since being founded by a goldsmith who obviously had a very high interest to be resource efficient and not have any waste. All our integrated sites are really driven by the constant optimization and conservation of resources. So that's at the core. So whatever raw materials we use, we want to use them efficiently and preserve and not waste anything. The larger driver behind it is really this notion of moving to a circular economy. Today we have an economy where economic growth or growth of companies very linear. The more raw materials you use, the more products you produce, the more you grow. So it's all driven by more fossil fuels or fossil materials being taken out of the ground and put into the value chains. And in order to meet the sustainability goals that we all believe by 2050, according to the Paris Accord, should be met, we will have to wean ourselves off this very linear system and move to a circular system. So we can't just continue using everything based on fossil fuels. We'll have to adopt and use different raw materials. And I think this is where the chemical recycling comes in. We want to increase the share of recycled raw materials and reduce our use of fossil fuels over time.
It's always interesting for me to understand philosophy and culture of companies. And you've just mentioned, that from the start you guys were into something. And being a German, I heard this word Verbund. Yeah, when you go on to the Ludwigshafen site, and I used to be a customer of yours many, in another lifetime. Verbund was always the word. Explain this a little bit more to me. I think it's an interesting thing.
Okay, so basically what is translated is just nothing more than integration. But what we mean by the concept is that the chemical plants at the site are very much interconnected. So the output of one plant is ideally by pipeline put into the next plant to convert it further for another product. But every process also creates side products. It creates maybe waste heat, or it creates, a byproduct stream. And we don't just burn byproducts or just release the waste heat. We try to use, energy created in one process, use that into another process. So there's an energy verbund, if you will. The product streams are connected. So the byproduct of one plant might serve as a raw material in another plant to make other products. And so you can think a little bit of it a little bit as a picture of a tree. You have a trunk, and then it kind of branches out, and it's a little bit how the whole production setup works. Everything's very much interconnected, and from very few starting raw materials, you create a wealth of end products.
Yeah, that's interesting because, as you know, in the circular economy world, people are starting to say we need this sort of combination of plants to make better use of, for example, waste energy, and so new industry parks are being set up. So you're saying that the Ludwigshafen site is a sort of a blueprint of that sort of approach?
I don't know whether you call it a blueprint, but I think that's the same idea. I think the industry parks try to do also very much the same, that instead of transporting materials over long distances, you put sort of plants right next to each other. You have savings there. You have the energy integration. You have all sorts of other benefits. I think that's the whole notion of industry parks that we not only see in Europe, but we also see that to a large degree also being pushed in Asia, especially in China. I think there also the industry is moving more towards clustering in industry parks.
That was an interesting sidetrack. Sorry for sidetracking you here. Let's get back to the pyrolysis and something that immediately springs to mind. We're talking about a technology that is evolving.
Mm-hmm.
So let me ask you this. Are you actually running another stream of fuel oil into your process that is separate from the one that comes out of a fossil fuel well, or how do you do that?
No, actually, we don't run it separately. We use the pyrolysis oil as a feedstock alongside the conventional feedstocks. So, for instance, we can feed it into our steam cracker, and there the different raw materials get mixed, and they are then processed together. So, looking at the molecules, they become indistinguishable from each other. But of course, we're processing the volumes together. And then in terms of the end products, the recycled content is allocated in what's called a mass balance approach, is allocated to certain volumes of the end products. So the plants are always physically connected, so they know if we feed in a pyrolysis oil in one end, the products coming out at the end that are based on the recycled content are connected. So we always make sure that there's a physical connection, but it's a mass balance allocation. It's probably best compared to what people are familiar to from green electricity. The electricity that you get out of the outlet in your house may not directly be produced in a local renewable energy facility, but with your purchasing decision to buy green energy, you make sure that somewhere in the grid the corresponding amount of green energy has entered the grid. And I think this is kind of the same approach that we use for for recycled raw materials when it's mixed and allocated. The benefit of this is that if you look at the alternative of having what you mentioned a segregated part, that you would treat it separately, you would have to build up all the plants again. You would have to really have separate raw material streams, separate downstream units. So there would be a significant investment required. That would, of course, slow down the adoption of different raw materials, and it might also not be economic. And as I mentioned last time, it's also a scale topic. Today, the volume streams of recycled raw materials are still fairly small compared to the overall raw materials being used. So this is where the mass balance approach helps to over time substitute fossil raw materials. And the consumers at the same time can be sure that if they are buying, or the customers, if they are buying a recycled product, the corresponding amount of recycled raw material of pyrolysis oil has been put into the system.
I'm suspicious, you're going to charge more for the recycled stuff, of course. Yeah. So there is this temptation to tweak the numbers. How can I trust that mass balance? That in green energy, you use the analogy. There are some challenges around that as well.
Yeah.
How do you get this certified? How do you make sure that I can trust you?
We make it auditable. So I think we also spend quite a bit of effort to make sure that we can internally trace the volumes. And so if you put in 10,000 tons in the beginning, where did the volumes get used, and are we at a certain period of time also exactly selling that? So that's auditable. So of course we can't. That would ruin the whole concept if you start to fool around with that. So that was from the very beginning clear. This has to be done properly. So that's done. Obviously, what it also requires is a certain regulatory environment that supports the use of mass balance, like it does for the green energy. I think this is also something that's a prerogative to making this technology and making this development succeed.
So in essence, that requires the pyrolysis oil to be very, very similar to the fossil fuel you're using. Does that put a limitation on the process, or can you sort of adjust?
Well, it puts, I wouldn't say limitation. It puts a certain burden in terms of the purity. Obviously, I mean, if you look at the components that you can find in many plastics, I mean, just as an example, you might have chlorine or something included, and of course, that would be highly corrosive in any chemical plant. So, I mean, these are the components that have to be removed from a pyrolysis oil before we can use it. But the rest is is not so difficult, because chemically it is very close to a naphtha or similar products.
And as far as I know, naphtha is not always naphtha. Yeah, I mean, it changes in composition as well. So you must have some flexibility in your process, I guess.
Well, same as like a modern steam cracker has some flexibility to deal with different grades. I mean, it's not always the same exact same grade of naphtha that goes into a cracker. There's a certain raw material flexibility built in.
I'm just afraid that we might have lost the audience now. Let's just step one back. So the oil is basically, the oil that can be used to be refined, and a certain part of that oil could become diesel fuel for engines, but it could also be the raw material to create chemicals, be it plastics or other carbon-based chemicals. And in order to do that, you bring the oil, which is a mixture of many different chains and stuff like that. You bring that into what you call a cracker, and that then segments it out. Yeah, is that what we were talking about?
Okay, exactly.
Oh, I'm glad that I still remember that correctly. So that's great. So let's get back to the business behind that. That's what we're interested in here. So I understand why you're doing it. You described that, and that it's part of your philosophy anyway. Now, your customers, how do they react to that opportunity here? Well, how do they respond to that?
I would say they respond with a very high interest for a number of reasons. I think we're not the only company. Many other companies and many of our customers have made commitments to increase the use of recycled materials, to reduce the use of fossil materials. So what we offer here is something that helps them meet these commitments. I think that's that's one part, and where it becomes, I think, particularly interesting is that there are certain applications where, let's say, for instance, if you look at food packaging, where you cannot use normal or mechanically recycled materials because of concerns on that there are in terms of the health and purity. But for the chemically recycled materials, because it goes through this extensive purification and basically is indistinguishable from virgin material, you can use that for food packaging. So even if you're talking about a packaging material that has a very demanding spec, we can meet that with the chemically recycled material. Or if you look at, let's say, medical packaging, you mentioned the vaccination drive. Obviously, some of those materials for packaging medical supplies can be made from chemically recycled materials without any concerns, and it's fully within the regulatory requirements. I think this type of thing is what's really driving the interest from customers in these products.
And I understand you already have projects where you work with customers as we speak, but it must be on a relatively small scale yet.
Currently, yes, it is still a small scale if you look at the scale of the overall industry. But as I said, this is a developing technology where a typical pyrolysis plant maybe creates about 10,000 tons of pyrolysis oil, which is of course an order of magnitude smaller than what or two orders than what a chemical plant might be. So this is beginning, but we're scaling this up, and we see quite some interest to also take it further.
But if I'm one of your customers and we agree, I now buy from the mass balance thing. I think I've understood it now how it works. I say of those 10% or whatever it's or 1% or whatever it is, I buy that. Can I then put on my packaging that's 100% recycled, or how does it work?
Yes. So basically we what I meant by mass balance, you can, if we, just as an example, if we take 10% of this recycled raw material and 90% of the fossil, they are processed together, and in the end, you could, of course, say of all the products, 10% of the content is recycled, but you can also, and that's mathematically the same, you could also say 10% of the products are made entirely of recycled materials. And this is what there's an interest in both. There is an interest in wanting 100% allocation, or maybe just having a certain share. So both is possible, but what we ensure through the basically internal tracking and tracing is that the numbers always match. There's always a physical connection. So the plant that is producing, let's say, a certain fiber for the textile industry is connected to the plant that took in the pyrolysis oil.
I understand. But let me ask the specific question because I heard challenges around that. If I take something out of the mass balance from you, can I, if we agree, I've now bought my share and the share is 100% recycled, can I make that public claim, or do I get challenged by people saying that that is not possible to do it like that?
You can make the claim, but you're right. There is still some discussion going on in the EU on how exactly the boundaries of mass balance should be defined. I mean, there can be some way, different ways, and I think what we try to reassure our customers is by saying, we always ensure that there is a physical content. So we're not sort of adding pyrolysis oil in one plant and then we allocate that virtually to something entirely disconnected. I think this is where we say, you could also define a mass balance system totally loose. This you could do, but we think that it's like in the case of the green electricity. it's reasonable to say, if it's connected, if we are taking a certain volume of raw materials into our site, like in Ludwigshafen, and we replace continuously, maybe in the beginning 1% and increasing to whatever, we are achieving a certain goal, which is replacing fossil raw materials, and we allocate that to the corresponding downstream products.
So what you're saying is it has to have a physical connection, and that makes sense to me.
I mean, this is. I think this is a view that is widely adopted. Again, you're right. There is still some discussion. Obviously, there are people who believe a wider definition would be best. There are also some requests to define it differently. I think, being a chemist, being a scientist, for me, the definition with a physical connection makes a lot of sense. And let's see. I think it's good that it's openly discussed, because in the end, as an end consumer, I want to have full confidence into what I'm being offered. So I welcome this discussion. I think we have a clear position on the physical connection that I think is important, and I think we would try to also convince those who are still skeptical that this is a valid approach and not some, in Germany you would say, Augenwischerei, which is clearly not.
Interesting German expression. Yeah. Now, let's get back to business here. So it's small scale at the moment. We still have to do additional cleaning steps and what have you. I heard you say all this. So the material is more expensive. At the end of the day, it has to become competitive. What are the main cost drivers, and have you got plans to deal with that?
Yes, I mean it is more expensive, and there's a couple of reasons. Number one, I mean the processing step for the plastic waste to the pyrolysis oil, of course, itself, it costs some money. The plants have to be built and operated. It's still, if you look at the scale, quite small. I mean, and also the logistics. I mean, if you look at the fossil raw materials, I think that 2019, the global consumption was something like 100 million barrels of oil a day. So that's a huge amount of material as a very efficient industry. And where we are with recycling plastics and creating pyrolysis oil is quite a bit smaller. So obviously it is per kg of product, it is still more expensive to transport it. It is more expensive to build the plants. But we're working on really scaling this up and reducing the difference.
So let's ask that question. 10 years ahead, within the business model of BASF, where will you be with ChemCycling? 1%? 2%?
Okay, I mean, what we have, because what we didn't want to do is put sort of a huge unrealistic target 10 years down the line. What we said is, let's put a target in 5 years time, so in 2025, and make sure we hit that. So what we said, coming from basically zero or a few tons, we want to go to 250,000 tons of pyrolysis oil in 2025 that we use and also basically process and sell as final products. So that's also quite a significant ramp up, and of course, over that time, we expect the technology to develop further, and then to take it on a steep growth curve beyond that. So there's no target defined yet for 2030, but my focus right now is really making sure that by 2025 we actually deliver on that, make it a specific target, a concrete target, and something that can also be checked whether we hit it.
Now, this is one for those people with the glass half full and half empty, I guess, the 250,000 tons. I must say, this isn't that far away. That's only, 4 years from now. And that's a big number in that sense. It's a small number compared to what we need to do. And you talked about the number of plants that are required. How confident are you? I guess it's part of your bonus to achieve that target. How confident are you that you're going to make that? That would be very encouraging, I think.
No, I mean, I am confident, and I'm not just saying that because, yes, it's sort of my bonus might be influenced by that. No, but seriously, I am confident. This is something that we work for. We make good progress. I'm very happy about the partnerships that we have built to make this happen, and I think we have more ideas of further new partnerships to enter into and to take this forward. And I think the let's say the significant interest from the customer side is really what also then is the real driver. I mean, this is more and more customers are really asking, and then also, like you said, it goes from a first pilot production with a few tons, it goes to a scale up, and I think as our customers have success in their markets with products that are based on this recycled content, we will see the demand grow. And I think this is really what's driving us. It's not sort of just an internal target, it's really for us meeting the customer demand.
So in essence, what we're saying is that you have partnerships in place that will build the plants to create the oil, and you will buy the oil from those partners. Is that the way it's going to go,
Yes.
or you're going
Yes.
to make the oil yourself?
No, I think our approach has been that we work with partners to jointly invest or in various setups. We take the oil and with this, I mean, there's many companies that are active in this field, but our interest is in taking the oil and using that, and our interest is not just in producing pyrolysis oil.
Yeah, no, I get that. So in that also makes sense, that because the pyrolysis oil should be produced where the waste is, rather than
Correct.
where your place of conversion is. So that I think makes sense. But what's your role in the partnership then? I wonder, what are you providing? I'm one of your partners now. What are you doing for me?
Well, there's a couple of things. Number one is of course, the offtake of pyrolysis oil. I think this is, I mean, depending on what's the raw material, whether you're using plastic waste, whether you're using end-of-life tires, there's different outputs, and we are interested in the pyrolysis fraction. So that's one contribution. The other one is technology development. I mean, we have some experience in really scaling up new processes, and we work with our partners on taking the technologies and scaling them up. Also, maybe in further developing, especially the purification step, to take out the impurities from the pyrolysis oil and create a pyrolysis oil that can be used in a steam cracker alongside the traditional raw materials. So it's on the technology side. It's of course also a financial investment that we do, and then the offtake of the pyrolysis oil.
Lars, I'm very glad that you made this point, because in the conference board we just recently published a new report on the future role of business in society, and one of the important things that we mentioned there is to achieve the goals of the United Nations Sustainable Development for 2030. Companies can't be on their own; they have to collaborate with others. We have to break down the barriers of the limits of one factory or one site or one company. So and you've just made that point. So basically, what's happening here is some people really focus on creating that pyrolysis oil. You provide financial resources, you provide development resources, and most importantly, you guarantee the offtake, so that someone who invests in that then is in a safe place. So now that's something that applies here, but I think it applies in many other industries as well. If you think about achieving sustainable targets, think about collaboration. So thank you so much for that, Lars. Anything else you would like to emphasize in this context from your side still?
No, I think I can just thank you for the opportunity to talk about the chem cycling project in particular. Of course, there's many other things that we're doing in terms of moving to a circular economy, but that would probably fill another podcast if we could do. No, but seriously, thanks a lot. I think it's important to have discussions and talk about the pros and cons and the difficulties. These developments to moving to a circular economy, like you said, do require companies and investors and different people to collaborate in new ways, and to have a very open discussion, to also have the societal acceptance for what we do. And I really appreciate the opportunity that we could talk about this, and I hope we can do this again. So circular economy is a fantastic topic with many more subtopics to consider.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing these insights. It's really interesting to see that a company that is so well established like yourselves is looking into new technologies to create these solutions to existing problems. So much appreciated. Thank you very much. And also for being open-minded in terms of the critical aspects here that still have to be sorted out. Thank you so much. And to our audience, if you've enjoyed this episode, please remember to subscribe to our podcast series or explore the entire catalog of our podcast programming from the conference board by visiting our website at tcb.org/podcasts. And you can also write to us at sustainability@tcb.org. Thank you for listening today. And please join us in the next podcast in 2 weeks' time. Thank you and goodbye.